Two cucumber plants started from the same seed packet on the same morning in early May. Same bed, same soil, same sun exposure, same watering schedule, same everything, except for a single event on day 7. One plant received 1 quart of homemade yeast brew poured at its base. The other received an equal volume of plain water. By day 12, the treated plant was already noticeably taller, and its leaves were a noticeably deeper green. By day 15, it was 18 inches high and pushing out lateral shoots, while the control plant was still struggling past 8 inches, leaves yellowing at the edges. By day 20, the first flowers appeared on the treated plant. By day 28, it stood 40 inches high, with a stem thick enough to need a second stake, covered in blooms, while the control barely cleared knee height. At harvest, the untreated plant produced 3 cucumbers, weighing just under 1 pound total. The treated plant produced 9 cucumbers, each one plump, dense, and firm, for a combined weight of 3.1 pounds. Same seeds, same soil, same care. 1 watering, $1 worth of baker's yeast, and a yield more than 3 times higher. Type 1 in the comments if you've already fermented anything for your garden, and 2 if this is the first time you're hearing that the exact same organism used to make bread rise can trigger a measurable growth response in plants. What connects those two facts involves some genuinely interesting biology, and it also explains something that the fertilizer industry has known for a long time and would prefer you didn't think too hard about. The practice of using fermented brews to feed crops is not new, and it is not a single culture tradition. It exists independently across farming communities on multiple continents, which tells you something important. This was discovered repeatedly, in different places, by farmers paying attention to what actually worked. In the hill country of South Korea, small-scale farmers have long relied on a preparation called fermented plant juice, a technique of packing wild harvested greens with brown sugar and letting the mixture transform in a sealed jar over 1 to 2 weeks in a shaded location. The resulting liquid, dark, aromatic, alive with yeasts and bacteria, gets diluted and applied to fields to accelerate growth and build crop resilience. This practice is a pillar of a modern natural farming movement called Jedam, which has systematically documented and standardized traditional Korean fermentation techniques for contemporary small-scale agriculture. A related preparation in the Jedam framework involves fermenting rice flour or rice wash water with sugar to produce a concentrated yeast culture in 2 to 3 days. The microbial community that develops is then used as a soil inoculant and foliar spray, applied at dilution rates measured carefully against crop response. The framework is empirical and well documented, developed by a Korean farmer named Young-Sang Cho, who spent decades cataloging fermentation-based methods that reduce or eliminate the need for purchased inputs. In the cottage gardens of England, a parallel tradition developed around comfrey tea, chopped leaves soaked in water and often seeded with a small amount of sugar to encourage fermentation. The bubbling and the pungent smell that develop over 10 days to 2 weeks are markers of active microbial transformation. The resulting brew is diluted and applied as a potassium-rich liquid feed. The addition of sugar was rarely explained in written sources, but experienced gardeners knew it accelerated the process and changed the character of the output. In the kitchen garden manuals of Soviet-era Russia, where access to commercial fertilizers was unreliable and expensive for private dacha gardeners, handwritten guides circulated describing yeast-based ferments made from whatever was available: bread crusts, expired yeast packets, sugar, diluted in water and left to work for a day before application. These weren't theoretical exercises. They were practical responses to scarcity by people who needed results from limited plots. What connects all of these traditions across 4 continents and multiple centuries is the underlying biology, which modern plant physiology research has now explained with enough precision to understand why the growth responses are real, repeatable, and, within limits, predictable. The exact recipe, including the optional additives that turn a basic yeast brew into a complete balanced feed, is coming up right after the science. Subscribe now so you don't miss the follow-up video where we run a properly controlled side-by-side trial across 6 different crop types and publish all the data. Baker's yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, is a single-celled fungus. When activated by sugar and warmth, it enters a period of intense metabolic activity, consuming sugars and producing ethanol and carbon dioxide as it multiplies. But the chemical output of this process is not limited to fermentation byproducts. As yeast cells proliferate and their metabolic rate peaks, they synthesize and release a range of compounds that plants recognize as biological signals. The most important of these are cytokinins and auxins. These are plant hormones, molecular messengers that regulate fundamental growth processes. Cytokinins stimulate cell division and delay cellular aging, which in practical terms means more vigorous new growth and a longer productive life for the plant tissue that absorbs them. Auxins regulate root elongation and branching. When root cells absorb auxins, they respond by extending and dividing more rapidly, producing a denser, more extensive root architecture that draws water and minerals from a larger volume of soil. A plant physiologist at the University of Minnesota, Dr. Iniku Nadi, has documented this mechanism in detail. When roots absorb the hormone mix produced by an active yeast culture, the cellular response is measurable within days: faster cell division in the root tips, increased lateral root initiation, and a subsequent above-ground response in stem elongation and leaf expansion. The root expands first, then the shoot follows. This is why the growth surge in the cucumber trial was visible by day 12 but not day 7. The system was building underground before it expressed anything above ground. The second mechanism is nutrient unlocking. As yeast cells multiply and eventually die off, their cell walls break down and release phosphorus, nitrogen, and trace minerals in forms that are immediately bioavailable to plant roots. Soil microbiologist Dr. Mateo Alvarez has documented in laboratory settings that wheat and sugar beet treated with yeast-based solutions showed 20 to 30% higher yields compared to untreated controls. The effect was strongest in soils with low baseline nutrient availability, which describes most garden soils that have been cropped for more than 2 or 3 seasons without significant organic matter inputs. In these soils, yeast acts as a biological bridge. It converts marginal fertility into a form the plant can actually use. The third mechanism operates at the level of the rhizosphere, the microbial community in the soil immediately surrounding the roots. When a yeast brew is applied at the base of a plant, the sugars and metabolites in the solution feed not just the yeast itself, but the broader community of soil organisms. Bacteria that were dormant or operating at low activity shift into a higher gear. The diversity and density of microbial life in the root zone increases, and as that microbial activity intensifies, more nutrients are mobilized, more soil structure is built, and the plant's own root microbe partnerships strengthen. A single application doesn't just feed the plant directly, it upgrades the biological infrastructure that feeds the plant continuously. There is also a documented protective effect. Saccharomyces cerevisiae, when it colonizes the root zone, competes with harmful pathogens for space and resources. In greenhouse trials, plants treated with yeast fermentations show reduced incidence of root diseases and faster recovery from drought and heat stress. The mechanism is partly competitive exclusion. The yeast occupies ecological niches that pathogens would otherwise fill, and partly the biochemical signaling that an active yeast colony sends through the soil medium, which some research suggests primes the plant's own systemic resistance pathways. Now here's the question that explains why you have never seen this product on a garden center shelf, despite it outperforming many products that do appear there. Why can't the fertilizer industry sell it? Living yeast never stops working. The moment it is activated by sugar and water, it metabolizes, divides, and produces carbon dioxide. In a sealed container, that gas has nowhere to go. Pressure builds within days. A vented cap can't keep pace with a thriving culture, and the liquid goes flat or sours as the yeast exhausts its food supply. Commercial fertilizers are engineered around the opposite requirement: stability, shelf life, predictable storage across seasons. Synthetic formulas are mineral salts, inert, stable, indefinitely storable, shippable on pallets to garden centers that restock once a quarter. A living yeast brew has a useful life of a few hours to 1 day after preparation. It cannot be bottled and sold through a conventional supply chain. There is no patent on baker's yeast. It is as old as bread. There is no proprietary formulation to protect, no barrier to entry, no way to build a recurring revenue stream from a product whose entire recipe fits on an index card and whose main ingredient costs less than $1. The fertilizer industry's business model depends on selling products that run out. A $1 packet of baker's yeast doesn't run out. You make a new batch on the day you need it. That is not a commercially viable product. It is a commercially unacceptable one. Here's the exact recipe. You need 1 tablespoon of dry active baker's yeast. Any brand, including expired packets from the back of a drawer, will work. Add 2 tablespoons of plain granulated sugar. Pour in 1 quart of warm water, warm enough to be comfortable on your wrist, not hot enough to burn. Temperature is critical. Water above 43 degrees Celsius will kill the yeast before it activates. Water below about 21 degrees will slow activation significantly. Stir until the sugar is dissolved and the yeast is suspended evenly. Place a lid loosely on the jar, never seal it airtight, as the carbon dioxide produced during fermentation needs to escape. Leave on the counter for a minimum of 2 hours. For maximum microbial activity, let it ferment for up to 12 hours. The signal that the brew is ready is visible, a thick foam on the surface, like the head on a freshly poured beer. That foam is a dense suspension of living yeast cells and their metabolic output. If there is no foam after 2 hours at room temperature, the yeast may be dead. Try a new packet. Yeast costs next to nothing, so there is no reason to use a packet that isn't performing. Once the foam peaks, dilute the entire quart into a 5-gallon bucket of water. This dilution step is not optional. Concentrated yeast brew applied directly to plant roots is too strong and will cause osmotic stress, the opposite of the response you want. The diluted solution should look faintly cloudy. Use it immediately, within 2 to 4 hours of dilution, before the microbial populations settle or the biological activity diminishes. Pour it directly at the base of the plant, soaking the root zone. Do not apply to foliage. The base recipe works well on its own. For growers who want to push the results further, 3 household additions create a more complete nutritional profile. Wood ash. Sifted from a clean hardwood fire with no painted or treated wood included, provides potassium, the nutrient most directly responsible for fruit size, flavor, and stem strength. 1 to 2 cups of finely sifted ash stirred into the 5-gallon diluted brew adds meaningful potassium without any cost. More is not better. Excess wood ash raises soil pH and can lock out other nutrients. If your soil is already alkaline, skip this addition. Epsom salt, magnesium sulfate, available at pharmacies and garden centers, adds magnesium, the central atom in every chlorophyll molecule. 1 tablespoon per 5-gallon batch is sufficient. Plants that are nitrogen supplied but magnesium deficient show a characteristic yellowing between leaf veins, while the veins themselves stay green. A single application of magnesium often resolves this within a week. Finely ground eggshell powder adds calcium for cell wall integrity and structural strength. 2 tablespoons per 5-gallon batch, ground as finely as possible. The mild acidity of the yeast fermentation helps dissolve the calcium carbonate slightly, improving availability. Dried and ground eggshells can be stored indefinitely in a jar and added as needed. Together, these additions provide potassium for fruit quality, magnesium for photosynthetic capacity, and calcium for structural integrity, the 3 macronutrient gaps most commonly observed in garden soils that rely on synthetic nitrogen alone. Application frequency matters. A single application every 7 to 14 days is the effective window. More frequent applications do not compound the benefit. They can stress root systems and tip the soil microbial balance in unproductive directions. Start with 1 test application to a single plant before treating an entire bed. Watch for 1 week. A plant responding well shows accelerated new leaf production, deeper color, and visibly faster stem elongation. A plant showing pale new growth, wilting, or blackened root tissue near the application point received too strong a solution or was already in a nutrient-saturated soil. Dilute further or extend the interval. Results vary with soil baseline. In soils with very low available nutrients, the growth response can be dramatic. The cucumber trial was an example from a soil with minimal existing fertility. In soils that are already rich in organic matter and biologically active, the response is more modest, 10 to 20% improvement rather than triple yields. The honest benchmark from controlled field trials is 20 to 30% yield increase in nutrient-limited soils. That is still a significant gain from an ingredient that costs less than $1 and takes one afternoon to prepare. The global synthetic fertilizer market generates over $200 billion in annual revenue. Every farmer and every gardener who brews a jar of yeast water and pours it at the base of a tomato plant represents revenue that market does not collect. The biology does not require their permission. The yeast does not require their patents. The microbes activating your soil have been doing this work since before the first human planted a seed, and they will keep doing it whether or not it fits anyone's business model. This is not a miracle. It is fermentation, one of the oldest and most reliable biological processes on Earth, applied deliberately to the place where it has the most leverage. Your kitchen already contains everything you need. Your garden already contains the soil biology waiting to be activated. The bridge between them is $1, a jar, and an afternoon. What will you pour on your garden this week? Share your results in the comments.